Hello, I'm Adaam. I'm here with Brianna Wu, and this was originally supposed to be merely an Uncertain Things episodes, my show where we talk to people who are in the epistemic ambiguity of the current moment. But since Jamie Weinstein could not host the Dispatch podcast on this Monday, I also decided to share this with our dispatchers in case you're interested. You might have grown tired of me because we just released the episode of my interview with Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL. But if you are interested in more conversations, then stick along. Brianna, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I stepped on your interview. Sometimes, despite being a guest, I will say things as though I'm listeing to the show I sometimes watch. So it's kind of embarrassing. So I'm sorry.
No, that's wonderful. It feels like you're adding hype.
Yes, I'm your hype woman today. I'm
exactly.
excited about
adding
this.
snaps. So
gotta get some good vibes. It's Friday.
I don't think I gave you a proper introduction. How do you want to be introduced today? Former
expert
Democratic
in
operative?
the epistemic horror of the moment. That works for me. I'm changing my Twitter title as soon as I get out of here. No, I'm executive director of Rebellion PAC, Democratic fundraiser, lovable gal about town, as I like to say it.
And I know that you've been doing a lot of work with the Free Press recently as well.
Yes. Love them. It's always a great time.
Yes, you're there with my friend and sparring partner, Batya.
I love Batya. She's so misunderstood. People are so mean to her. It's so crazy.
People are so mean, period. I think that is the
but this is
moment.
What pisses me off about what they say about Batya, is Batya is a good person. I don't agree with her on a damn thing, but she is a good fundamental person, and she's not bullshitting about what she thinks. And the only explanation people can come up with for disagreeing with her is she's a Putin stooge, or she's corrupt, or this or that. And it's like, no, she's just come to a different conclusion, one that half the stupid country shares. So can we just assume our fellow country people are not in the pocket of Russia? It's just insane to me.
What do you make of that general sense of feedback that people in central positions, including yourselves, when they express an opinion that creates some kind of public rancor, that they would automatically be associated with the worst possible interpretation of their motivation, of their motives?
Well, I think it doesn't help that so many people in the media space are acting out of the worst motives imaginable. They're clearly doing it for a paycheck. And, this whole tenant media thing, I think it certainly didn't do the disinformation claims any. I think it certainly helped bolster that point of view.
So tenant media, just in case people aren't following, that's the group of podcasters and right-wing influencers who have been provenly paid off by the Putin regimes through some, straw companies.
For some pro-Russia content. I do feel like I have to say, because, Lauren Southern is a friend of mine. I think there are good people that had no idea what was going on, that just got caught up in that. They just went and got a paycheck. But there's clearly money coming in with that situation. But I think there's a general problem in the country. And I think we'll get into this today, where someone has a heterodox view, something that's out of step with what people believe, like, for instance, on trans issues, that instantly they have to be a transphobe or a bad person. Instantly it goes to a personal attack rather than considering the argument. And this problem has gotten worse every single year I've gotten alive. And I truly don't know how to reckon with this other than to keep telling the truth as I see it.
So I wonder, you pointed out something really interesting. TED Media as a case study literally paid to be Putin stooges, as in the most Machiavellian way. However, people who work there don't necessarily, it's not like they necessarily signed up, oh, I need to get in on that Putin money, sign me up. Those are people that, for whatever reason, held these views and made associations with each other, or were invited to join that company because of views that they were already promulgating publicly.
Right.
And this is merely, the least cynical way of looking at this is the same habit of any kind of political group that is not necessarily a foreign actor. They want to put money into the people who are naturally inclined to promulgate their views, right?
100%. So it's not like the Democrats don't do it. I can tell you because I've run those teams myself. So, like, I think the issue is not the putting together, structures by which like people can get out messages. The issue is the hostile foreign power being involved with
right.
that. Right. It's not like every single media institution doesn't have a point of view. The New York Times has a point of view. It's certainly not neutral. It's pro-institutionalist. Wall Street Journal, who I think has some of the best reporting in the entire financial industry, they certainly have enough of a point of view if you read their op-ed page. So I personally don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I know some people disagree.
So before we dig deeper into all these questions, can you give our listeners a quick background of how you found yourself in politics?
Sure. It's so interesting. But 10 years ago, there was something called Gamergate. I was an independent video game developer working on my own game studio. I just wanted to tell stories where women got to be the hero. Back in 2014, there just were fewer women protagonists. So I hired as many cool women game developers as I could find. And we shipped a game that I thought was a really breakthrough piece of design. It was fully animated. Women were the main characters, beautiful hair, rich storytelling, all of that. And, we won a bunch of awards. And as that game was shipping, Gamergate was, happening to the game industry, which was this... God, how do I even say it? It's the pretext is it's about ethics in journalism because there was an accusation that Zoe Quinn had slept with a Kotaku writer to get a game review.
So for people who don't even recognize those names, just like this is because I'm sure that many dispatchers, while they may have heard the term,
let me try and tell it more simply. Let me just tell it simply. Gamergate was it was the way we argue online today, with personal destruction and going after women, calling us feminists and sending us rape threats and death threats.
Right. But there was also an element there, which I think is important to point out because it was probably for many people of that generation and to some extent you as well, was a galvanizing moment into politics. And in some ways it's, you could say there was a good aspect to it because it raised a lot of questions about the role of media, the role of power in society, but also it ended up replicating the toxicity that you're describing into broader political engagement and defined these terms of personal hostility, of doxing, of violent threats, of intolerance towards dissent and conversation to the public sphere.
Was a really big one.
Right. Yeah. So specifically you were mentioning Kotaku, that was or is still Game Criticism magazine, right? A gaming magazine.
To the extent it still exists, which is somewhat diminished.
Right.
But yes. But I mean, that is to say, like this, it really was a cultural flashpoint. Like Gamergate was the moment that American politics changed forever. It really was this toxic version of politics where we could no longer talk to each other that permeates everything today. So many of the key people from Gamergate, me, Steve Bannon, Milo Yiannopoulos, Candace Owens, Lauren Southern, I mean, just go through the list. A lot of the major media figures today got our start there. So I think
it's actually worth explaining to the people who only knew that in the background, and I want to give you the chance to explain it to people who really probably only have heard it as, oh, those kids are arguing online. What were the stakes? How it played into the questions of media ethics? What were the fault lines at that moment?
Well, the stake is is it okay when someone says something you don't like to go through everything they've ever said and to find something to attack them with and to send waves of anonymous accounts after them, harassing them and threatening to murder them until they just quit the internet, which is something that's happened to women journalists on the left and the right today. It's entirely normalized. I think everyone on every single side of the political aisle has seen this playbook today, and Gamergate's the one that started that. It's disgusting. I tried to get the FBI to prosecute it. I told them back then if they didn't, it was going to set a precedent and this was going to be the future of American politics. And I was 100% right.
And can you tell the story, the synopsis for our dispatchers?
The story of like what happened. They sent me a ton of death threats, rape threats. There was one so extreme they made a Law and Order episode about it. Threatening to kill me, my husband, my dogs, my children. I don't have children, but if I did, they would have threatened to kill them.
What was the source of that animosity?
Because I was advocating for hiring more women in the video game industry.
At what point did that become something that causes such rage from?
Well, there was a sense that like the feminists are coming to change the video game industry. And look, in retrospect, they were right. I'll 100% give them credit for that. The truth is this progressive idea of how to approach inclusion, it did end up corrupting the game industry and a whole lot of other things. What is amazing to me, 10, 11 years later, is to look back at Gamergate and to understand in many ways progressives are the villains now. We're the ones sending rape threats and death threats. It's just a J.K. Rowling. So very disturbing. So
before we even move forward to when this got you more engaged in politics broadly, this is something interesting. You're rushing through this moment because for you, I think this is something that was first, I'm sure, painful, but second, something that you've processed million bajillion times in your head. But I think it's not that trivial to a lot of people who only know you from afar and only heard the shadows of these arguments. It's interesting that you've already processed the idea that to some extent the anxiety that gamers had that led them to rebel so violently against quote unquote the feminization of the video game industry is something that to some extent you now agree, even though obviously you disagree with the way it was expressed and the violent undertones, or not even undertones, the overt tones that it took at the moment. So can you explain what were the things that caused that kind of anxiety at the time, that where you disagreed with them, with the arguments, not with obviously the violence and the death threats and the cruelty? And then what changed your mind about this?
Well, Lee Alexander wrote a really famous piece for Kotaku called Gamers Don't Have to Be Your Audience. And she was noting the explosion of more casual games like, a Stardew Valley, or, mobile games, Candy Crush and all of that. And she was really saying, like, look, game developers don't have to focus on this traditional audience, very male, very into hardcore games. And, the game industry can change. And I remember thinking at the time, like, wow, that's stupid. That's ridiculous, And the truth is that I think gamers were correct to understand that some of this ideology was, I don't want to say dangerous, because it's not dangerous if a game developer makes Candy Crush, but there was an effort to change their culture. Let me just give you one really good example. A game came out last year called Stellar Blade. Now, look, I'm into men. I am not the target audience for games with extremely sexualized women protagonists with camera shots up their butt and all of that. This is not a game for people like me. But, this is a game heroine design that only could have been made 10 years ago. And it's just been kind of decided to be put on the wayside. That game sold like crazy last year. There's clearly a massive audience for it, even though like the game developers have kind of gone like, oh, no, this is bad. We don't want to do this. So there's like a distance between the political goals of a lot of game developers and what the audience itself is asking for. And I think that works both ways. Like, it's true that our industry does tend to ship like male empowerment fantasies that don't write women very deeply. At the same time, I don't begrudge some horny 14-year-old boy that wants to play with some ridiculously cleavagey character. Like, You know better than I would, but I think that's what y'all are into for a certain part of your life. So, yeah, that's freedom of speech. That's freedom of expression. And I think gamers were sensing that that was under attack, and they ended up being right.
So the sentiment was that, I mean, underlying all of this is the fact that the gaming industry was probably still is, predominantly male, predominantly young men
Yes.
and with for a lot of them, not the youth necessarily,
not the audience, and not the game developers. Average game developer is like a dad nowadays. But yeah,
right. That's a good point. Even people who were in their 20s during Gamergate are now in their 30s and have a family. Yes. Right. That's a good point. Yeah. Shockingly, time does move in a linear fashion forward.
Yes, it does.
But it is still predominantly male, and many of the most successful products do offer some kind of power fantasy to men. The criticism that came against it, and I think there was the Sarkeesian videos and a lot of applied academics to the world of video game industry that introduced this kind of gender criticism that basically put a focus on the male nature that it was being catered to by games, and which
is a fair criticism.
Yeah. Oh, correct. Which is like definitely true. And what does that have to what does that do to female imagery, right? And then the question is, what does that actually mean to the industry? The backlash from gamers was a sort of gatekeeping sense of, don't touch my toys, don't take away the thing that I care about and turn it into preachy. Don't try to educate me. And I think that for a lot of that crowd, that created a sense of rejection of what they started seeing as authoritarianism, right? This is when a lot of people who may not have been as political were captured by the sense of the left is coming for my toys, and they're trying to control my life and control my mind. And this is why you get figures like Steve Bannon and Milo Yiannopoulos starting to get popular attention.
There's a quote from Steve Bannon before Trump got elected in 2016 where he says, look, you bring these young men into the right through Gamergate or whatever, you radicalize them, you start turning them into the issues, and then you bring them into Trump. And that's exactly how Trump won in 2016. It wasn't just Gamergate, but it was a whole host of, hey, they're trying to take away your culture. This is actually remarkably similar to what the right is doing right now with trans women in sports, where it's like, hey, these trans women, they're trying to take away your culture. Better look at this. And then it just causes everything to catch on fire. So let me just tell a really quick story on this. When I was growing up in Mississippi, I had an internship at an office. This was Trent Lott's office. And I remember we were looking at some polling that came in one time. And one of the top questions there was, the Democrats are trying to take away our culture. That was one of the things that they were thinking about running the campaign on. It tested through the roof, sky high, crazy. So when you make people feel like their culture is under attack, they will rally behind the flag and they will do something about it. That is what, this works two ways. The young men of Gamergate were far too concerned about the number of women in games being hired going from 5% to 7%. That's just a silly thing to be upset about. At the same time, there was a culture that was changing with all of these progressive politics that were coming in there. And this is where, Adam, I really want to stress this. I got into Gamergate because I thought women were not being treated fairly with how we were being hired and what the process was for women to have a fair shake to get venture capital to start game studios. Okay. There is structural discrimination there. That is a real issue. I didn't sign up to usher in some fringe progressive censorship over everything that is said and done. And that, unfortunately, is a lot of the direction that the industry's gone in the last decade. And I think it's really unfortunate, looking back on this, that I played such a part in ushering in a culture I don't agree with.
It's the problem of having this polarized cultural discourse where it becomes, if you want to support getting more women into gaming, then you also have to buy into this entire package of critical theory and completely reimagining the mind of young men.
Yes.
Or you are against the tyranny over the minds of men, which means that you also are against seeing any progress for women, or you completely buy into entirely hidebound troglodyte views about gender roles and politics.
Exactly. It's all or nothing thinking, and Gamergate was very much the start of that. And, as we're saying, like, your original question, how we got on this digression here is, Brianna, like, how did you get into politics? So after this, I ran for Congress. I didn't win, but I did really well. And from there, I learned like the bread and butter fundraising skills, lobbying skills, compliance skills. I learned how to be a pretty good Democratic operative, which is what I've done for the last decade. And what I've seen in the progressive sphere, I had a really, really, really hard break with them on October 7th after that, because I had been seeing this movement that was cancerous and immature and destructive, and I'd seen it hurt project after project after project in the Democratic Party. I'd seen it lose us elections up close, and I'd had like my severe reservations about it. And it's not that I don't agree with the progressive idea, like universal health care would be a good policy goal to move towards. It's this belief cluster that goes along with it, that it's like, oh, if you believe we should have universal health care, then you've got to like believe in this reverse hierarchy of oppression where a Black disabled trans woman who's an amputee gets to speak and a white guy is at the bottom and has to shut up all the time and is secretly evil. No, that's not American. That's not democracy. Like, we're moving towards something where we're all equal. And what I found is the distance between what progressivism was fighting for in the policy arena and the outcome of what we were doing in the party was so distanced that I just could not be involved with it anymore.
Before October 7th, where do you see signs of that, if at all, during your process with the party? Oh
my God. Left and right. My really first regret with the progressive movement was with the Women's March. And, they had a bunch of anti-Semites on the board there. Talking, basically kicking
Lena
Jewish women.
Sarsour, I think, most notably.
Yes, 100%. Absolutely disgusting. And, I want to just be honest. I saw this at the time and I was like, yeah, this is kind of I don't know that much about Palestine and Israel. I will just shut up because women's rights are important and abortion's on the ballot. Let me just go forward. But I remember looking at this and going, holy shit, this is just flat out anti-Semitic. This is worse than anything I saw in Mississippi growing up. What the hell? And I started thinking through like all the really uncomfortable conversations I'd had with people about Israel and Jews and how there really is this permeating belief in progressive circles that Jews run the world, which is just crazy. So,
and this
there were
is
signs,
an impression that you were getting.
I went right over them. Please.
So these were impressions that you were getting earlier, like when we were talking about the heyday of the Women's March. We were talking about what, 2017, 2018.
100%. But before that, during Gamergate, a lot of the feminist figures would put things like about Palestine in their comments. And again, Palestine is not something I really thought about before October 7th. It just didn't impact my life. It's a part of the world that's been on fire my whole life. And I just tuned it out largely. Like, I was aware of the Second Intifada and when the peace talks broke up under Bill Clinton, but I just honestly didn't know that much about it. So, there's this cancer of anti-Semitism that is growing in the progressive movement that it's getting louder and bigger and worse. And I'm seeing it hurt more things. And then October 7th happened. And oh, Jesus. Like, there's a woman who I went to a conference in a city, a major city with. I don't want to name her here. A feminist conference. And we're up there talking about sexual violence on stage and the importance of standing up against this. And this is a professor. This is someone that I really liked. I considered a friend. I talked to on the phone all the time. And after October 7th, I'm looking at her Twitter and she's talking about how there's no rape and this is actually an act of resistance. And I just lose my shit, like absolutely lose my shit. And I call her up and I'm like, do you not remember how we met? How can you be minimizing this? Like, I thought we were against sexual violence. When do we start giving a thumbs up to like rape is a legitimate tactic of a struggle? How dare you say this? And then she starts getting into the really anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Like, it didn't really happen. The Jews are lying about it. It's an IDF plot. It's like, I'm just looking at this bizarro thing that I could not have even imagined happening in front of me. And it's like all this evil that I've just been looking past. Like, I can't dance past it anymore. It's right there on my friend's face. And this is why I realized I really needed to sit down and start reading about the history of Israel-Palestine. Like, something was really, really wrong here that I needed to understand. And the more I educated myself, I came to a point where I had to have a complete break with progressivism. It's just not a force for good.
It's interesting to note you don't come at it as not a Jew, not a latent Jew, even like many progressives who might be come from a Jewish family, you have some Jewish background. You don't have a Jewish background
at all. I'm Presbyterian. I mean, I'm adopted. My mom could be Jewish, but yeah, it's like, it's just not my stuff, right? I grew up in the church.
Right. And I don't think that's I think the surprising thing about your evolution on this particular topic, because I don't think that many people who don't have any kind of affinity or some sort of Jewish background experience that moment as a breaking point. Because for a lot of people, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is a topic that they feel uncomfortable to have an opinion on, or they default to their natural positions about power relations.
Yeah.
And especially when you are embedded in democratic progressive politics, where there are certain notions of power are definitive of one side's morality, right? If you are the powerful player, if you are coded as the power holder in our dynamic, you are ipso facto the oppressor.
Yeah.
And it is the only people that for the most part, the people that I've seen to have broken out of that mold post October 7th were Jews, which to me, I have to confess, always irks me a little bit from Jews who were supposedly paying attention to the Palestinian story and turn a blind eye to that. You called it a cancer. I'll just call it this pathology on the left, and then suddenly paid attention on October 7th from my Jewish friends. For somebody who's not Jewish, did not particularly have any affinity to this story, to that part of the world, to have gone through this process is intriguing. Why do you think this was such a break for you?
Well, it's not like, I mean, I marched with Black Lives Matter, right? Like, that mattered to me. I mean,
right.
I grew up in Mississippi. Like, I've seen like anti-Semitism up close. I remember when a Jewish person moved into our neighborhood growing up and hearing all my relatives mocking them. Like, when I was growing up on Thanksgiving, I didn't even know what a Jew was. I'm sitting there listening to it. I'm like, this is the same way they talk about Black people. And it just was like the most evil thing I'd ever heard in my life. So, I mean, it's not like I don't feel solidarity. I mean, I'm a trans woman and I feel like I understand oppression. I think at some point, like, we have a responsibility to look out for each other. I think what really got me about this conflict is the stakes, in my view, are insanely high. This is not just about Palestine, because if you really, really start understanding these forces, like, this is just looking at it from 30,000 feet. I think the big conflict in the world right now is the West and democracy versus everything else. And the West and democracy is under attack by strongmen, and it's also under attack by Islamism. And I think if you were looking at, this theocratic political project that is, led to 9/11 and led to ISIS and destabilized the Middle East, is why, there are rockets firing into Israel nonstop. You've got to understand this political project is also currently destabilizing Australia, is destabilizing the UK. And I think it is, as we saw from the post-October 7th protests, I think it's destabilizing the United States. I think that that was a non-trivial factor in Trump getting elected. So it's not like, it is personal for me. Like, I care about my Jewish friends and neighbors, but I also understand I've got skin in this game. Democracy is what gave me my civil rights as a trans woman, and that is fundamentally under attack here.
So that's interesting that these are the terms that the story fit into. I think there's actually a very Dispatchian line about the protection of, or holding the ideal of, a liberal democracy and the liberal world order at the top of your priorities, and recognizing that it is coming under attack. Yeah. I think this is an interesting question, because you said that you, growing up in Mississippi, seeing how people who come from a background of white supremacy talk about Black people, and being a trans woman yourself, knowing what bigotry feels like, that you recognized that kind of cruelty, that you recognized the bigotry. However, you could say that easily, as I'm sure many progressive opponents to your position would say, if they were, if they had this conversation and didn't shout at you, I think they would argue that you could also see oppression on the Palestinian side. You can see the immiseration of the Palestinian people, and over the past 30, 60 years. I mean, they would argue 75 years, but even if you look just at the case of Gaza, putting them aside the West Bank, you look at the state of Gaza. I'm not even going to get into the absurdity of calling it an open air prison, but just the state that they live in was kept down, and Israel was not entirely like out of the water for blame. Although obviously I can argue against that, but for the sake of argument, why do you see why was it clear to you that the oppression went in one direction, or that the threat to liberal democracy comes in one direction? Because if Israel is this military superpower who has currently a very right-wing government with a very you could say, I don't want to say intolerant, but a very aggressive bellicose agenda, how is that not also a source of threat to the stable liberal world order to be aligned with this kind of government?
Well, so, boy, I don't want to sum up all the history since 1948 quickly, but I think all of this has been made way too complicated. And respectfully, I think Jews really overcomplicate this story. When you try to educate the public about it, I think you go, well, in 1948, and then we had the Suez Crisis, and then the First Intifada, and then the Six-Day War, and the Second Intifada, and you want to go into each conflict really like in a complicated way. This is actually super
We like
simple.
our granularity.
Well, I think it's hard to follow. Like, I think there's a reason I couldn't follow it going up. This is really simple. In 1948, the British overpromised the land to two people. There was a conflict. The Jews won. And the Muslims, who had kicked the Jews out of every single country for centuries, really got really angry about that. And in the, 76 years, they've started 6 wars and 6 major conflicts. Israel has, in my view, started 0 of them, and Israel's won every single one of those, defending themselves. There's a anti-Semitic political project to destroy Israel and slaughter the Jews there. And Israel is trying to survive. And I really genuinely think it's that simple.
So tell me about the, if you're comfortable, about the responses that you got for staking this position after October 7th.
Oh my God, it's been like setting every friendship in my life on fire.
Personal friendships?
Personal friendships, relationships. I did the math on it. I've lost over $100,000 of contracts. Like it's really, really been a major factor in my life. Now I've gone and gotten other work, but there are a lot of people in the Democratic Party that are really, really pissed at me for taking this position. So, it's hard, but, I also think like something about my personality is I'm going to say what I think. And I just am not going to sit here and be silent while there's this project that's very obviously anti-Semitic that wants to target the rights I need to survive. Like, it's just insane to me.
So the idea of a complete break with a friendship, and that's why I said like a personal friendship, as opposed to say a colleague who you're only united on for the sake of a temporary expedient political alliance, and then suddenly when you realize that your ideologies break too far apart, you know that the friendship cannot sustain itself. Yeah. But if it's a personal friendship, if it's somebody that you've actually had in your life, can you tell me about how does this play out? How does your opinion about some moral issue create a rift in a real, true bond?
I'm going to tell you, there's a Syrian, half Syrian girl that I was really good friends with. Another trans woman. I really, really cared about this woman. Like, I really genuinely cared about her, talked to her every day, genuinely considered as friend. And I tried as hard as I could every single time it would turn to Israel to go, hold on, let's just not talk about this. You've got your point of view on this. I've got mine. Let's just form our friendship on all this rich ocean of stuff we deeply agree on. I tried so hard to do that. And just for whatever reason, she is so deranged about this Israel issue and thinks every single Jew is a killer and just is frankly an anti-Semite. And it just got to the point where that friendship could not go on. That really, really hurt me. And I've got probably 20 or 30 stories exactly like that. It's, for whatever reason, I don't understand it. There is a derangement and a set of double standards that apply to Jews that don't apply to anyone else. And I think there's a lot of evidence for this. If you look at what's going on with college campuses right now, you've got these lunatics running around clearly intimidating Jewish students. If anyone was doing this to a Black student or a woman or a trans student, they'd be thrown out like that. And just for whatever reason, these people get arrested and the NYPD just sets them loose. I don't know why Jews don't count, but for whatever reason, to a lot of Americans, they don't. And it's just not acceptable to me.
I asked this to Jonathan Greenblatt in my talk with him, and I think this is just an inevitable question to grapple with. But you talk about Jews being targeted, and I think that the targeters would argue that they are only looking to exclude Zionists, right? That the identity that they are tackling is not really. It's not the ethnicity, it's not the religion, it is a political view that they are fighting against. And why should they not exclude a political grouping, a view that they consider detrimental, even genocidal in their minds?
Well, first of all, the alternative to Zionism is a second Holocaust. Let's just be clear about that. If Israel doesn't exist at this point, what is it, 9 million Jews there and probably the 2 million non-Jews, they're just dead, right? Ethnically cleansed, they're gone. So if you're not a Zionist, you're in favor of a second Holocaust, in my view. So that's the first thing. Secondly, do you think I haven't seen this dance before? Like, I grew up in the 90s. I knew that when people couldn't say the N-word, they just moved over to saying thug instead. Like, it's obviously coded language. Like, when I look at my Twitter DMs and I get death threats, it's always Zionists like you don't deserve to live. That's how they dehumanize me. Like, it's clearly a political project that's based in anti-Semitism. And I think it's just laughable to try to separate those things.
And yet you'll have people who self-identify as Jews who lock arms with these protesters, with these rioters, and would even share the sort of vehemence in fighting against the Zionist oppressor, including the individual people carrying a Israel flag on campus, right? Yeah. And they will consider, I am a Jew and I have a right to stand up to Israel and the servants of this oppressive regime.
Yeah. I don't want to psychoanalyze the entire Jewish people, but I would like to make some observations because I've made a lot of friends that are Jewish since October 7th. And, let me just back up for a second here. When I came out as a trans woman, my mom disowned me like that. It is a pain that is still with me 20 years later. I yearn for a mom. And what I have discovered with a lot of Jewish people is like your moms are a little inappropriate and they're a little nosy and they ask too many questions, but they're very well-meaning. And what I have seen from my position is because you've got these communities that are so tightly knit, there's a good deal of trauma that I think a lot of Jews are dealing with from growing up with a community that kind of doesn't give you space, where you kind of see the worst of it all the time. And I think there's a desire to distance yourself from that is manifested in some really unhealthy politics, in my view. So I think it's, partially minority stress. And I don't know. I think there's some people, for whatever reason, they see the beauty of this community and just need to define themselves as not it. And I think it's just frankly sad from my point of view.
What do you see? Let me ask it a different way. Where do you see the sort of center, and I don't just mean political center between right and left, I mean as a core of political energy to defend the sort of liberal values you represented them, the liberal world, the democratic world? Because it's clearly not going to be the political moment on the right. That's not the current government has made it very clear that protecting the liberal world is not in its priorities.
Do you think so? Do you really believe that?
I mean, how would you? This is interesting. Do you think that there is potential for the current Trump administration to be a defender of the liberal world?
I can tell you, I have talked to more people in this administration than I have any Democratic administration. They are very eager for relationships with people on the other side, in my experience. And don't get me wrong, it's not that I disagree with Trump. I worked against him for a reason. I recognize he is a threat to democracy. But I do think that there's a mirror issue with extremism on both sides. And I think that now that the problem on the left is so apparent and the problem on the right is so apparent, I actually think there's a lot of overlap with people in the middle in our ability to talk to each other. Richard Hanania is someone I consider a friend. We don't vote the same way. We don't see the world the same way. But there is a commitment to democracy that he has that the fringe left just simply does not. So I actually think there is a really rich opportunity now for the reasonable people in the middle to talk to each other and move us forward if we can just get past this culture war nonsense that isn't getting anyone the policy they want.
But if I read both some of the actions coming out from the Trump administration as well, and that's vis-a-vis Ukraine, prosecuting enemies while pardoning friends, everything is sending signals of a more transactional, a more thuggish, mafioso approach to politics, which does not seem to primarily or at all prioritize a liberal world.
Trump is terrible. I mean, I fully agree. What I'm saying is Trump may be their president, but he does not represent every single Republican. And I think that there are a lot of opportunities right now for Democrats to work with Republicans. Does that make sense to you?
I mean, I hope so. I think, so I don't know if you know the history of the Dispatch, but the Dispatch was founded from disaffected right-wing pundits and Republicans, and primarily from the perspective of preserving their view of conservatism, which is really conserving the American mission of classical liberalism,
Yes,
and liberal democracy, seeing that as the constitutional the commitment to the Constitution and to the American world order, the Pax Americana of post-war,
and you really
post-Cold
think
War
that's dead in
liberalism.
the Republican Party right now?
What I'm saying is that if you talk to my colleagues, you will hear a lot of despair. So, in fact, you are probably the person that I hear the most sense of optimism and potential for new alliances around these shared values. I don't know. I try to watch. I don't have any talent for prognostication, but it's just interesting for me to hear the most optimistic view of our current state coming from somebody who is from the left, and second, who has been under grueling, relentless attack from her own crowd. Yeah.
And the right for years.
And from the right. That's after surviving a decade of attacks from the right, turning a page to enjoy the hatred of your own community.
Don't you think that there's a rich constituency in America that's just tired of all this culture war bullshit? Because I can show you polls all day long that show this is true.
What is it? The tired majority, the exhausted majority?
Yeah.
I want to cling to that. I mean, on my optimistic days, I tell myself that the power of the American constituency to redefine itself and oscillate, and even the back and forth between Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump, shows, I guess, a vitality of an electorate, for better or worse. And on my darker days, I think that it will be difficult. It will be difficult, and in fact, because the terms of the argument in the culture keep getting more and more aggressive and violent, and it becomes, I think, more difficult for people to maintain their quietude and their healthy reticence from politics, and they are dragged into having stronger, harsher, more violent opinions because they keep thinking that the other side is coming for them.
Yeah.
And sometimes the other side is coming for them.
Gun. I mean, that's just the truth of it. At some point, one of us is going to have to put down a gun and try and talk to the other side. And we're going to have more tools in our toolbox than just violence and destroying the other side. Like, that's just the truth. And I can tell you, like, I've been on the front line of this culture war in a way very few people have. It does not get us anywhere. There's no public policy I can point to the Gamergate accomplished. Like, it's the way democracy works, and I understand this so clearly now in a way I didn't a decade ago. You're not pushing for some utopian future. You're trying to put together a coalition of people where you can just agree on something that makes it better. And then you take that step and you assess and you do another one. That is so clearly what America needs right now. Like, I'm old enough to remember where goddamn country worked. And it just keeps getting worse and worse with this hyper-partisanship. And I have to believe that the fever is going to break at some point.
There's also the cyclical effect of the view that you're describing, which I would consider, again, very conservative, or at least dispatchian, in understanding the value of sluggishness, of the government plotting and not rushing towards remaking the people in a more perfect form. And I think that instinct seems to be either forgotten or at least wearing out on people. And in fact, the energy is increasingly towards wanting to speed up government, letting move fast and break things.
Well, that may work well for Windows, but I don't think it's going to work here. I think we're taking a turn that really brings us to something I would love to talk about now, if that's okay.
Of course.
Because I think this feeds really well into this, which is, I'm not just known as someone very dissatisfied with their policy post-October 7th. I've really become someone who's synonymous with being a critic of our current approach to trans rights.
Yeah.
And I think this really ties into the thing that we're talking about here, because the Dispatch being kind of an old school, looking for those conservative values. I want to tell you a story about what's gone wrong with trans rights and why the trans people that are coming out today are so different than I am. So when I transitioned over 20 years ago, we had a document called the Standards of Care. It was written in 1998. And there was a really, really, really long list of stuff I had to go through to transition from male to female. It involved months and months and months of therapy. It involved getting letters. It involved going to an endocrinologist, getting buy-in, having tests done, getting second letters written. Before I could start getting surgery, I had to go out and actually hold a job to show that I could thrive in my social role and make friends and not just sit on the internet all day long. And, there was this guide path that we went through. And it said, look, you're in pain right now. If you go do this thing, we can evaluate you and see if you're ready to go to the next step. And it created a generation of trans women that, I think I've done pretty well for myself. I've been married to a man monogamously for 17 years. I've run for Congress. I own the house I'm recording in. I've got some lovely Porsches. I've had a good life. It really set me up for success. This comes into the conservative argument because that document, the Standards of Care, was at its core a conservative document. It was thinking through this and going really slowly with people. And there has been a progressive political project to take that document and tear it to shreds in the name of instant access to all of these medications, which I want to be clear, will change your body for your entire life and make you dependent on external hormones. I could take you to Planned Parenthood literally right now and get you on anti-androgens that would destroy your testosterone and your testes today. And you would be going down that path because every part of that has been destroyed. And I feel so strongly that this progressive political project, in the name of love and acceptance of everyone, it has caused us to embrace a series of extreme medical procedures on people where there's zero evidence it serves them the way it did me. And I think until we can have a real reckoning with all of this, my fear is these nut jobs that are lying about the science are going to make the healthcare for people like me not tenable if we stay on this course.
Not tenable because it is leading to a backlash from the right that is now trying to claw away not just back to your view, but 50 years behind. And in fact,
100%. But
right.
Not just that, the science is giving very poor results nowadays. Because when you get people that are not transsexuals the way that I was, I responded very, very well to these treatments because I'm the textbook, I'm the thing in the medical textbook. They're not. And they're going out and they're getting on all these extreme hormones and they're having extreme surgeries like vaginoplasty, which is, you don't have your penis after that. It's an extreme surgery and it's not serving some of them.
When you're saying they're not like you in the sense in the...
they don't meet the clinical criteria.
The phenomenologically, they are not, you would say that they're not trans, that they are...
No, they're not trans. If you go through their case history, they don't meet the DSM standards in the same way. They've got comorbidities. Autism is something we're not even talking about. There's a massive explosion in trans people with autism. I would estimate it's about a third of us now. It was not that way 20 years ago. They transition for different reasons. They don't experience gender dysphoria in the same way. And maybe transition helps them. Maybe it does. I can't say. But I can't say it doesn't because we don't have any science on any of this.
In your view,
so understudied.
Your view is that this explosion is a form of cultural contagion, right?
100% is lowered standards where you've got everyone from people with pedestrian gender nonconformity to confused, bored teenage girls to fetishistic crossdressers are telling themselves if they just go on hormones, it's going to fix all their problems. And it doesn't. This is extreme healthcare by any definition. it should really only be held for the people that meet a very high set of clinical criteria. And we've substituted, like, this is what really upsets me, is the standards of care. The document that outlines our healthcare has moved from science and things that we know with a reasonable level of certainty to applying all these crazy social theories. Like, are you aware that with no evidence whatsoever, they are telling people that if they want to have genital nullification, meaning having no genitals or endocrine system at all, that they will go facilitate that medically? There's no study you can point to saying this is a good idea. When I grew up, like, the people that wanted to be eunuchs, that was a fetish. And it's just been rolled into trans healthcare. It's absolute insanity.
How do you explain that the gates being flung open this way?
How do I explain the gates being flung open? I think that the activism project has hijacked the healthcare. So, there's an organization called WPATH, the World Professional Transgender Health Organization. It's been ideologically captured by the fringe left. Go on Twitter, like, look up who the staff are at WPATH and go follow their Twitter. They're communists, they're anti-Semites, they're just nuts. They're absolutely crazy. And they are fundamentally not interested in science the same way that other, like, medical healthcare providers are. So I think until we go and really put the science first, I think trans healthcare is going to keep getting weaker and weaker. And I think people that do not benefit from these procedures are going to get caught up in it.
And this is one of the issues that, until October 7th, probably would get you the most grief, to say the least, on social media and in general public discourse. I mean, I guess the kindest way of thinking about this is probably for a lot of people, this is a very intimate, sensitive issue that raises strong emotions. But then it also creates an environment of heightened emotions, anger, and hyperbole that gets thrown at anybody who stakes a position like yours.
Yeah.
Where are the adults who want to say, we want to help people in need, but helping people requires discernment, and it requires a more careful qualitative evaluation of people's conditions and what could help, and figuring out what would help each individual under their conditions. It would not help to just, bring down the lock from the medicine cabinet and say, like, have a free for all, right?
Yeah.
And it would be obvious with any kind of other treatment, let alone things that require surgery that are essentially irreversible and would define your life from here on.
If you're asking where the adults
we are the adults. Yeah.
They don't exist. I'm just being flat out. Like, who are the stakeholders here? You've got HRC, ideologically captured. They're pushing for the trans fringe, all this non-binary stuff, which we have no evidence for. 100% on board with it. WPATH, gone. Like, their emails have been leaked through these lawsuits. I encourage people to go read it. It is an organization that is interested in politics and not science, in my view. Seriously, go read it and make your own assessment. That's mine. There are individual healthcare providers that are good, but you don't have Democratic politicians that can just flat out say this. Seth Moulton did that in my state, faced a very steep price. So, this is the truth here, is we don't have adults running this ship for trans healthcare now.
I think the reason this is so hard for me to get my head around, even though I've been paying attention to it as an outsider, this is a topic that I've never waded into because it's not my bailiwick, but it blows my mind that something that, I can understand how people take an issue like the Israel-Gaza war and turn that into their own proxy narrative. They're playing their video game through the stories of Israel and Palestinians, and each player in America can pick their own heroes, their own players, and project whatever narratives they want without having to actually study history, without having to really develop the complicated moral and political historical savvy required to really have a discussion about this topic. Why would they when they can just cosplay as freedom fighters, wear keffiyehs, and march on the streets? But with the transgender,
I would say transsexual, not transgender. But please proceed.
Transsexual. Yes. Fair point. And actually, I want you to clarify this distinction. But my thinking is that with transsexuals, we are talking about people that you meet in your real life. This is not a story that is playing out on your Twitter feeds alone. This is something that can affect people that you know, and especially if this is with a growing social contagion, this is theoretically something that you see more and more of, and you have to navigate whether this person that you saw yesterday should actually go through a life-altering procedure tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And this is something that how could you be blasé about this? How could you be just, well, I guess just go for it. Like if you have, I don't understand. It feels like you would have, like just being human, seeing other humans making these like difficult decisions, you would have to apply more weight in thinking about this than what seems to be the case with the supposed gatekeepers.
But it's been the progressive political project. Let me give you a really concrete example that maybe can help you do this. So Buck Angel is a good friend of mine. And if you talk to Buck Angel, it's just clear he should be a dude. He's just got male energy. He's obnoxious in the best way men can be. He's just got dude energy. It was obviously a good call for him to go on testosterone. But it's also just true that we don't know that much scientifically about female to male transsexuals as opposed to people like me. Like you can go into 4,000 years ago. You can see my predecessors like in Rome. Like we're just a phenomena that's been all through human history. Women that want to be men is a much newer phenomenon. We weren't studying this in the 60s. And now it's just been this explosion of them. Like you can go back 10 years ago where it was like 1 person in 7 was a female to male transsexual. Today, those ratios are flipped. Like it's absolutely terrifying, like how fast this has exploded. So the problem is a healthcare process that was interested in getting those natal women the right kind of healthcare would go, well, let's talk about this. If you want to go on testosterone like Buck Angel did, we can talk about that. Like we will work with that, but we need to be honest with you. We don't know that much about the phenomenon compared to the male to female transsexuals. And the surgeries that we have are not as good. And there's a lot of weird complications you need to be aware of. Like you can be in your 20s and incontinent, and your organs may fuse together and you may have sepsis and die. Like a honest healthcare system would give those patients that information. Right. Instead, what happened is this progressive political project happens where it goes, well, men and women are equal, right? So therefore, these two phenomena, it's got to be the same thing. So if this study is true for the male to females, I'm sure it's fine for the female to males.
But this is crazy.
And so they extrapolate it out.
But this is crazy because the history of feminist criticism of the medical establishment was that that women's healthcare never got the same kind of attention that male healthcare does, and many studies only apply to men and therefore put women's health at risk. This is a very smart and long-standing criticism, right?
That's really true. I can't believe I've never thought about that. You're dead on. Yes.
Like how is it flipped? This is mind-boggling.
Well, it hasn't flipped, has it? I mean, it's healthcare for natal women. Yes. So,
I mean, but politically, are you basically saying this is the internalized patriarchy of the left?
I'm saying that there is a politics first approach to the science, right? If we were honest, we would tell those natal girls, if they want to be boys, we could say, this may work, this may not work for you. we don't really know. We don't really have a criteria to determine who's going to really respond to this. And instead, we just said these things are the same. Another one is this non-binary political project. We have no evidence that putting these non-binary people that in no way qualify for transsexuality, they fundamentally do not meet the diagnosis. There's no study out there that would justify putting them on testosterone or estrogen.
How are they
this
defined?
Happens every day to not adults, but children, because we do not honestly label this.
So how do we hear this term a lot, non-binary, but what I spoke with James Kirchhoff several times, and he is entirely dismissive of the entire category of non-binary as a false concept. But what do you understand even as non-binary? What is this category?
So I think it's clearly something like there. It goes beyond pedestrian gender nonconformity for some of them. For many of them, it is just pedestrian gender nonconformity. But this, again, is where if we were treating this seriously, we would be commissioning studies. We would be developing
when you say pedestrian nonconformity,
for it. Yes.
When you say pedestrian gender nonconformity, you would say just like an effeminate guy?
Yeah, effeminate guy, okay. A girl likes to play with Legos, or be engineers, all that kind of stuff.
Right. So a tomboy girl, that would be pedestrian gender nonconforming, right?
In my view, look, when I transition, I adhere fairly closely to a typical gender stereotype. I like men, I cook dinner for my husband, love putting on makeup, all that kind of stuff, right? Like, that's just my vibe. Like, I'm comfortable with that stuff. There's some natal girls that aren't, and that's okay. Like I understand, like, in the age of Instagram, like, there's got to be a lot of pressure to be perfect. But my point here is not a judgment call on non-binary. I think something is going on there. My point is, if you truly value those people, you don't funnel them into a cheap political project that just fits into the progressive narrative. You commission studies, you start developing a protocol to identify them at the clinic, and you start figuring out what helps them with these feelings. Is it testosterone? Is it estrogen? Is it treatment for the ones at autism to help them deal with sensory issues? Is it just helping them accept their gender role? I don't know. And neither does any other doctor. And we need to start being honest about that.
Feel free to brush away the question, but would you mind sharing how you knew that you were trans?
Oh my God, I've never had a second of doubt in my entire life. It's when I was really, really young, I wondered why I had those parts and started asking my parents when they were going to go away. Wanted to play with girls in kindergarten, and this was Mississippi in the 80s, and effeminate boys get fairly punished for that. I played dress up in my mom's closet and played with her makeup or high heels, all that kind of stuff, and just it's just what I am. And I went into a really deep depression. I was substance addiction, and life went wildly off course. And I finally got the courage to transition. I was actually the first student to ever transition at the University of Mississippi, which is kind of crazy.
How did you come upon that as a path, the transition itself?
I mean, I've been thinking about it my whole life. Actually, I can show you. So when I was 12 years old, I was feeling very suicidal. So I knew I was going to die if I didn't figure out what was wrong with me. And pedaled down to the University of Mississippi library because they checked the libraries at my school. And this is a book from 1964 called Transsexualism and Sex Reassignment. It's basically a psychological breakdown of what we knew about girls like me in the 60s. And I'm reading it and looking at graphic medical photos of vaginoplasty from that era, and kind of horrified me. So that was when I found out what I was.
was there, when the idea finally landed that you were going to do it, was there a lot of hesitation, or when it clicked, it clicked?
Well, I knew I probably wanted to transition, and I went on estrogen, and just bam. It's like my brain had been broken my whole life. I could think clearly. I had emotions. Just wonderful. It was like going from a black and white TV to full HD surround sound in every aspect of my life. And I just knew it was right for me and went full steam ahead from there, and have never regretted it for a second, even though my family disowned me and I ended up homeless. It was the right call.
Wow. And I'm sure I would even assume that without knowing your Twitter feed, but you are concerned about what's happening now from the Trump administration in regard, or a general Republican motion to completely curtail access.
I mean, there's some stuff that I think is reasonable there. I mean, there are obviously two sexes, right? And I think anyone that is denying that is just lying, right? So I don't necessarily have an issue with that. What Trump is doing goes beyond that. It is robbing us of lives of dignity where we can transition and move on with life. He's making it so we cannot use NIH dollars to do any kind of research into transsexual healthcare outcomes. So let's say if you are a parent and your child comes to you and says, I'm non-binary, please put me on testosterone. There's no research that's going to happen on that with NIH dollars, thanks to Trump, which would probably give us some helpful answers. So it's one of these things where I think parts of it are good because there's clearly a correction that needs to be made. But I would really urge conservatives, really think about this. For me, I had a healthcare issue. I went and got healthcare, and it made my life better. I have paid millions of dollars in taxes throughout my career. I hire people. I am a credit to my community. I participate in our government. I am a good American citizen. That happened because I had a pathway to go have a normal life and move on once I transitioned. Those are the things that are being taken away by the Trump administration. So you really have to choose. Do you want a nation of Brianna Wu's? Or do you want a nation of broken progressive activists that can't leave their house? Because if you take away all the options to normalize this, that's what you're going to end up getting.
Brianna, you've been so generous with your time. So before letting you go, I have to ask you my kicker question for uncertain things, since this is the double podcast today. What would you say is the blind spot on the left, and what are the blind spots on the right at this particular moment?
I think the blind spot on the left, do you know what Chesterton's fence is?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So just in case your listeners don't know, there's this, it's a Catholic theologian that came up with this. And basically it's like a bunch of people go out into a field and they see a fence that's there. They don't know what it's for, and they tear it down, and it ends up that fence is really, really important. I think that the left, in our rush for things, tends to tear down institutions in the name of progress without asking ourselves if there's value there. And I think it's really to our detriment. I think on the right, the really big blind spot that I have is that I see as a lack of compassion sometimes. I say this is someone that grew up in the right, but I think there's a real sense that you can just tell people to ignore a problem and it will go away. And that's just not the way the real world works. We need conservatives. We need your pragmatism. We need your thoughtfulness. And we need to keep that core focus on our values moving forward. We need you in the mix for solving these very complicated problems that our nation is facing. So I think we're stronger if we do that together. And I hope you'll do that with me.
Brianna Wu, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Uncertain Things. Follow us on uncertain.substack.com or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're feeling generous, give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and share us with your friends and enemies. Until next time, stay sane.